Imagine trying to teach a computer, not just to see a human body, but to fundamentally understand the invisible microscopic symphony of brain waves and nerves and muscles that make it move.
Right.
Because we are talking about translating the sheer raw complexity of human biomechanics into lines of code. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are joining us today, you are stepping into an incredibly ambitious intersection of medicine, artificial intelligence, and honestly, global health strategy. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it is one of the most fascinating challenges we've ever looked at on this show. Translating tacit human medical knowledge into scalable digital architecture isn't just about building a clever app.
Right, it's way bigger than that.
Exactly. It's about taking the instinct, the touch, the analytical mind of a physician and digitizing it. And for those of you listening, we have a mountain of material to get through today.
We really do.
We've got deep biomechanical and neurological analyses of human movement, comprehensive medical examination protocols, and the literal technical blueprints, down to the dollar and the hour for a cutting-edge 3D AI medical assistant.
Yeah, and we're also looking at a pretty sobering academic paper on the ethical risks of AI competence, plus massive market reports on healthcare systems across Asia.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. Our mission today is to decode how Dr. Christophe Delong and a company called Kinexa Formation are attempting to pull this off. We are going to trace this entire journey right from the microscopic firing of a single motor neuron. Then we'll move to the creation of a 3D AI health avatar, navigate the ethical minefields of medical AI, and finally, look at its potential application in the booming digital health markets of Asia.
Which is exactly why Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa Formation present such an interesting case study here. They aren't approaching this from a purely Silicon Valley, move fast and break things perspective. Right. They are approaching it from a deeply medical foundation. Because to understand what they're trying to build, you have to realize that true medical diagnostics of movement operate in incredibly muddy waters.
Muddy in what way?
Well, when you break a bone, an X-ray gives you a binary black and white answer, right? The bone is broken or it isn't. But movement
is fluid.
Exactly. It is continuous. It is governed by systems that are entirely invisible to the naked eye.
And before we can even begin to understand how Kinexa's AI analyzes that movement, we have to understand the staggering biological complexity of movement itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Looking through Dr. Delong's medical foundations and our sources, I was blown away by what happens before we even twitch a muscle. For you listening, if you are out for a run right now or even just reaching for a cup of coffee on your desk, what your brain is doing in the background is borderline science fiction.
It really is. It's a biological supercomputer at work. If we look at the documents detailing the neuromotor loop and the specific analysis of a ballet pirouette, we get a timeline of movement that is almost hard to comprehend.
Let's break down the anatomy of a single movement then. Where does it start?
The intention to move, the very thought of it, starts in a region of your brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or the DLPFC.
Oh, yeah, the DLPFC.
Yeah. And here is the kicker. This happens a full 300 to 400 milliseconds before any physical action actually takes place.
Wait, hold on. Almost half a second before I even move my leg, my brain is already firing up the engines.
Yes.
So if I decide to swerve my car to avoid a pothole, my brain made that decision half a second before my hands actually turned the wheel.
That is exactly what the data tells us. The neurons in the DLPFC are firing at 40 to 60 hertz. We are talking about quantum-level neurotransmission here.
Wow.
In less than a millisecond, glutamate is released into the synaptic cleft. This chemical messenger binds to AMPA and NMDA receptors.
AMPA and NMDA. Got it. What do they do?
Well, AMPA receptors are the fast actors. They open instantly to let sodium rush into the neuron, creating the initial electrical spark. NMDA receptors are a bit slower. They require both a chemical signal and an electrical change to open.
Oh, interesting.
But they are crucial for memory and learning the movement over time.
Okay, so we have this electrical storm happening in the front of my brain, and then what? It has to get to my muscles somehow, right?
Right. The signal has to travel, and it has a really long, complex journey. It moves from the prefrontal cortex to the primary motor cortex, which is sort of like the command center.
Okay.
From there, it travels down through a bundle of fibers called the internal capsule, squeezing past all these deep brain structures. Then it hits the brainstem, specifically an area called the medulla. And here's something fascinating happens. The decussation of the pyramids.
Which sounds like an Indiana Jones movie title.
I know, right?
What is the decussation of the pyramids?
It's the anatomical crossover point. Roughly 85 to 90% of these nerve fibers cross over to the opposite side of your body right there.
Oh, so that is why the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body and vice versa.
Exactly. After crossing, the signal rockets down your spinal cord.
And looking at the sources, it is traveling unbelievably fast. It mentions these signals travel down the alpha motor neurons at speeds of 70 to 120 meters per second.
Yep.
For those of you doing the math, that's up to 268 miles per hour. That is literally the speed of a Formula One race car happening inside your spine.
They are the fastest nerve transmissions in the human body. These are the A-alpha fibers, and they're heavily insulated with myelin to ensure the signal doesn't leak or slow down along the way.
Makes sense, like insulation on a wire.
Precisely. They carry the command directly out of the spinal cord to the skeletal muscles, like your quadriceps or your hamstrings. But the transmission of this signal is only half the story.
Right, because there's a feedback loop.
Yeah, and here is where the biology gets incredibly sophisticated. It's a concept called alpha-gamma coactivation.
Okay, yes. I was reading this section of the neuromotor loop document, and it honestly melted my brain a little bit.
A lot to wrap your head around.
If you're listening, picture this. Actually, can you explain how this coactivation works? Because it seems like a massive paradox to me.
It really is brilliant evolutionary engineering. When that high-speed alpha motor neuron tells your muscle to contract, to lift your leg, the muscle physically shortens.
Sure.
But inside that muscle, nestled among the regular muscle fibers, are tiny sensors called muscle spindles. These spindles are responsible for your proprioception.
Which is how I know where my body is. Like, if I close my eyes right now and raise my arm, I still know exactly where my hand is, even though I can't see it. The sensors are pinging my brain with its location.
Precisely. They tell your brain how stretched or contracted the muscle is. But think about the mechanics. If the main muscle shortens, those spindle sensors inside it would normally just go slack.
Like a rubber band?
Yes. Imagine a rubber band stretched between your hands. If you bring your hands together, the rubber band droops. If the muscle spindles went slack every time you contracted a muscle, they would stop sending signals.
Oh, wow.
Your brain would suddenly go proprioceptively blind to that muscle the moment you used it.
Which seems like a catastrophic design flaw. I mean, if I'm trying to walk down a flight of stairs, going proprioceptively blind mid-step sounds like a great way to end up in the emergency room.
Which is exactly why the body evolved the gamma motor neurons. At the exact same millisecond, the alpha neuron tells the main muscle to contract. A parallel signal goes down the gamma motor neuron.
Okay, so two signals at once. What does the gamma one do?
The gamma neuron's job isn't to move the joint. Its job is to tell the ends of the sensor itself to contract, keeping the sensor pulled tight. It constantly reels in the slack.
Wait, really? It's pulling the slack out of the rubber band in real time.
Yes, exactly.
That is wild.
This ensures the sensor stays sensitive and keeps sending data back to the brain, even as the main muscle changes length. This coactivation is what allows for continuous, uninterrupted feedback to the brain during highly complex, dynamic movement.
Like the pirouette.
Exactly. To see this pushed to its absolute limit, the sources delve into the biomechanics of a ballet pirouette.
Right, and this is where I really had to stop and reread the text, because a pirouette isn't just spinning around. When I read the breakdown, it sounded like my brain is running a NASA space shuttle launch sequence just to lift a leg and turn.
It is an incredible feat of physics. Let's look at the cerebellum's role during that pirouette. The cerebellum is the part of your brain at the back of your skull that coordinates balance and fine motor control.
Okay.
During a pirouette, the dancer is rotating their entire body mass on a tiny surface area, the ball of the foot, known as the demi-point.
Right.
The cerebellum, specifically a central region called the vermis, is calculating angular velocity at 360 to 720 degrees per second.
That's 1 to 2 full rotations every single second.
Yeah.
But the dancer isn't just a rigid top spinning. I mean, they are biological tissue. They wobble. How does the brain keep them upright?
Through constant high-speed error correction. The brain takes the predicted position of the body, where it thinks it should be based on the motor command, and compares it to the actual sensory feedback coming in from those muscle spindles, from the inner ear and from the eyes.
So it's constantly comparing what it wanted to do with what is actually happening.
Exactly, calculates an error signal. If the dancer is tilting slightly too far forward, the cerebellum detects that discrepancy and sends a corrective command back to the motor cortex, And it does this every 10 to 20 milliseconds.
Every 10 to 20 milliseconds. It's like a guided missile constantly adjusting its fins in midair to hit a target. Except the target isn't a building. The target is just maintaining equilibrium.
That is a phenomenal way to put it. And the physical forces the body has to generate to maintain that equilibrium are just immense.
The document details specific muscle synergies, right?
Yet just to hold that demi-point stance, to keep the heel elevated while supporting the body's weight and the centrifugal force of the spin, the calf muscles, specifically the deep soleus muscle, are producing up to 6,800 newtons of force.
6,800 newtons. Just to put that into perspective for you listening, that is roughly the equivalent of holding up an entire small car with your calf muscle.
It's astounding.
And all of this, the quantum neurochemistry, the real-time physics calculations, the error correction loops, the massive mechanical force is happening entirely subconsciously. The dancer is just thinking, spin.
Right. And this brings us back to the core challenge for Dr. Christophe Delong in Connexa Formation. This granular millisecond by millisecond data, this profound understanding of underlying biomechanics, is what separates true medical expertise from a basic consumer fitness app.
A basic app might just use your phone camera to count your squats or track your heart rate.
Exactly. But Connexa is trying to teach a machine to recognize the invisible symphony. They're trying to infer the integrity of the neuromotor loop simply by watching how a person moves on video.
But wait, this brings up a huge hurdle.
Yeah.
So the body is this biological supercomputer, and it's running all these silent calculations, but what happens when there's a glitch?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, when someone has a limp or a pinched nerve or a torn ligament. To figure out what Connexa is trying to build, we have to look at how a human doctor currently solves this problem. We have to move from the theoretical physics of movement into the physical reality of the doctor's office.
Which leads us to the source document titled Examine Locomotor Long, the long musculoskeletal exam.
The long exam.
Yeah. The clinical diagnostic process is an absolute art form. It is the combination of years of training designed to tease out the root cause of a biomechanical failure.
And it doesn't start with touching the patient. I noticed that. It starts with a conversation, the anamnesis.
It's exactly the patient history. But a good doctor isn't just asking, where does it hurt? That's way too superficial. They are acting as an investigator.
Digging into the details.
Yes, they are digging into this specific type of pain. Is it a sharp shooting pain that suggests nerve involvement? Is it a dull aching pain typical of muscle strain? Is it acute, chronic, intermittent? They use a visual analog scale to quantify it.
And they look at the context around the pain, right?
Yeah.
Are there specific triggers? Does it hurt more in the morning, which might indicate inflammatory arthritis?
Or does it hurt more at the end of the day, which suggests mechanical wear and tear like osteoarthritis?
Right.
They ask about your job, your hobbies, your family history of rheumatological diseases.
Right.
They're building this massive, multidimensional, holistic picture before they even lay a finger on you.
Well, but then, of course, they do eventually touch the patient. The physical exam structure is meticulously standardized into 3 phases, right? Inspection, palpation, and mobilization.
Right.
Okay, let's walk through this as if you listening are the patient sitting on that crinkly paper on the exam table. Phase 1 is inspection. What is the doctor actually looking for?
Visually, the doctor is looking for the obvious and the subtle. They look for asymmetries. Is one shoulder resting higher than the other? They look at the spine for kyphosis, which is a forward rounding of the back, or scoliosis.
Makes sense.
They look for muscle atrophy, where a muscle has visibly shrunk because it isn't being used, perhaps due to a nerve issue. They look for swelling, redness, or skin changes.
And then comes phase 2, palpation. This is where things get highly tactile.
Yes, the doctor is feeling for muscle tension and spasms. They are pressing on specific anatomical landmarks to find localized tenderness.
Checking the joints.
Exactly, feeling the joints for crepitus. That grinding or creaking sensation that indicates cartilage wear. They're even checking for subtle temperature differences between limbs, which could indicate inflammation or poor blood flow.
Wow, okay. And then phase 3 is mobilization, which is moving the body around. The sources break this down into active and passive.
Yes.
So, active is when the doctor tells you to raise your arm as high as you can. Passive is when you relax your arm and the doctor physically lifts it for you. What does that distinction tell them?
That distinction is critical. If you can't lift your arm yourself, which is active, but the doctor can lift it for you without resistance, which is passive, it suggests a muscle or nerve problem. The engine or the wiring is broken.
Oh, I see.
But if neither you nor the doctor can lift the arm without severe pain or hitting a hard stop, It suggests a joint problem. The hinge itself is frozen or damaged.
That is so elegant, and the sources outline some very specific joint tests that honestly sound a bit like medieval torture devices, but are actually incredibly precise diagnostic tools.
Oh, completely.
Let's look at Sperling's test, for example. What is that?
Sperling's test is a classic maneuver for evaluating neck pain. If a patient comes in with pain radiating down their arm, the doctor wants to know if a nerve root in the neck is being pinched.
So the doctor has the patient extend their neck and tilt their head toward the painful side. Then the doctor presses straight down on the top of the patient's head, applying axial compression.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It narrows the space where the nerves exit the spine. If that downward pressure reproduces the shooting pain down the arm, it's a positive Sperling sign, strongly suggesting cervical radiculopathy.
Ouch. And then there is Cousin's test, which the sources detail for the elbow.
Yeah, Cousin's test checks for lateral epicondylitis, which is commonly known as tennis elbow. The doctor has the patient make a fist, pronate their forearm, so palm facing down, and extend their wrist back.
Right.
The doctor then places their hand on the back of the patient's fist and tells the patient to hold that position while the doctor pushes down, resisting the extension.
Okay.
If the patient feels a sharp pain right at the bony bump on the outside of their elbow, that indicates inflammation of the extensor tendons.
And there's Phelan's test for the wrist, too, where you press the backs of your hands together firmly, pointing your fingers down, and hold it for 60 seconds.
Yes, that's the one.
It forces the wrist into maximum flexion, compressing the carpal tunnel. If you start feeling tingling or numbness in your thumb and first two fingers, it's a strong indicator of carpal tunnel syndrome.
These tests are brilliant because they use the body's own mechanics against it to isolate the point of failure. And the doctors don't just rely on feeling. They use standardized measurement scales to track progress.
Like a physical protractor.
Exactly, called a goniometer. They use it to measure the exact degrees of your joint's range of motion.
And the MRC scale, the Medical Research Council scale, which grades muscle strength on a very specific spectrum. It goes from 0, which means no visible muscle contraction at all, up to 5, which means normal strength against full resistance.
Right.
So if a doctor says you have a grade 3 bicep, it means you can lift your arm against gravity, but the moment the doctor pushes against you, the muscle gives out.
Yes. And every single one of these steps, the palpation, the resistance test, the grading, is deeply reliant on human touch, visual intuition, and years of clinical experience.
Of course.
The doctor is looking for subtle compensations. Like, if your right hip hurts, how is your left shoulder subtly adjusting to keep your eyes level with the horizon? A human expert spots that instantly.
But this is where I hit a massive conceptual wall.
Oh.
Yeah. If you are listening to this and visualizing the doctor pushing down on your wrist or tilting your head or feeling the grinding in your knee, how on earth do you digitize this?
It's the big question.
It's like trying to bake a cake by looking at a picture of an oven. It feels fundamentally impossible. If a camera cannot physically touch the patient to feel muscle tension or physically resist their wrist movement, how can an AI possibly replicate the tactile feedback of a human doctor?
That is the central driving question of this entire deep dive. And it's exactly the gap that Dr. Christophe Delong and Connexa Formation are attempting to bridge. They know they can't touch the patient, so they have to replace tactile feedback with hyper-precise visual and kinematic data.
Explain how that works in practice. How does vision replace touch?
Let's take the MRC strength scale we just talked about. A human doctor assesses a grade 4 strength by feeling the muscle give way under pressure. An AI can't apply pressure.
Right.
But an AI, using advanced computer vision, can ask the patient to perform a specific movement, say a slow, controlled squat. The AI analyzes the amplitude of the movement, the precise speed of the descent, the microtremors in the thigh muscles, and the subtle asymmetries in the hips as the patient struggles against their own body weight.
I see. So the AI is looking at the effects of weakness. Rather than feeling the weakness directly, it's inferring what the doctor would normally feel by analyzing the physics of the struggle.
Exactly. It looks for compensations that a human eye might miss, calculating joint angles down to the decimal point, frame by frame. And to achieve that level of kinematic analysis, you need an extraordinarily powerful technological foundation.
Which brings us to the actual blueprints of what Connexa Formation is building. Let's introduce the company properly because their background is interesting. Connexa Formation was founded by Dr. Delong in Paris as a SASU. For those not familiar with French corporate structures, that stands for Société par Action Simplifiée Unipersonnelle, or a simplified joint stock company with a single shareholder.
Right.
The documents show an initial capital of just €2,000. Their focus is broad: health strategy, educational content, which is the formation part in French, and embedded software development.
It's a really modest corporate origin for what is arguably an aggressively ambitious project. Their flagship initiative detailed in these documents is the AI assistant for movement analysis.
And the target audience here is incredibly specific. They aren't building this for young athletes or tech-savvy teenagers.
No.
They are designing this specifically for people 50 years and older who need remote musculoskeletal diagnostics from the comfort of their homes.
Which changes the entire design paradigm. Building complex tech for older demographics requires hiding the complexity. And the technical blueprints provided in our sources are staggering in their detail.
They really are.
To build an AI that can analyze human movement remotely in real time without lagging, you need a highly robust, enterprise-grade tech stack.
I was looking at the components they've chosen, and it is a developer's dream list. For the user interface, the front end, they are using Next.js, but the heavy lifting happens on the back end, which is entirely hosted on AWS, Amazon Web Services.
Yep, the cloud.
They are using EKS clusters, EC2 instances, and Kinesis video streams. For those of us who aren't software architects, what does all of this actually do?
Let's break it down into a physical world metaphor. Think of their AWS setup like a massive automated shipping port.
Okay, a shipping port.
EKS stands for Elastic Kubernetes Service. Imagine you have thousands of individual shipping containers, and inside each container is a tiny piece of the Connexa software. EKS is the harbor master.
So it manages everything.
Exactly. It automatically moves these containers around, starts new ones if traffic spikes, and shuts them down when it's quiet, ensuring the system never crashes.
Okay, so EKS is the management system. What about the EC2 instances?
EC2 instances are the raw computing power, the cranes and forklifts of our port. But the documents specify they're using EC2 instances specifically equipped with GPUs, graphics processing units.
Not CPUs.
Right. Normally, standard computers use CPUs, which are great at doing a few complex tasks quickly. GPUs are different. They're designed to do thousands of simple tasks simultaneously.
Which is why gamers use them to render millions of pixels on a screen at once.
Exactly. And in Connexa's case, they need GPUs, because they are running massive machine learning models that have to process live video of a person moving frame by frame in real time.
Ah, got it.
Which is where Amazon Kinesis video streams comes in. Kinesis is the highway that securely streams the live video from the elderly patient's smartphone directly into the EKS clusters to be analyzed by the GPUs.
And what exactly is doing the analyzing? The sources name specific AI integrations.
They are integrating several cutting-edge APIs. The core computer vision engine is Metasapiens. This is the AI that actually sees the patient. It identifies the skeletal anchor points, the shoulders, elbows, hips, knees, and tracks them in three-dimensional space as the patient moves.
And they have to be able to talk to the patient, right? Because they can't expect a 7-year-old with a bad back to type their symptoms into a smartphone keyboard while trying to do a physical exam.
Right, which brings us to the voice interaction layer. They are using DeepGram for speech-to-text recognition. DeepGram is incredibly fast and accurate at understanding natural conversational speech, even with accents or background noise. The patient just talks to the screen.
And then the system has to talk back. The documents show they're using 11 Labs for the voice synthesis. 11 Labs is famous right now for generating incredibly natural-sounding, emotive AI voices.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a robotic GPS from 2010. It breathes, it pauses, it sounds human.
But here is the element that truly elevates this from a sophisticated app to a potential medical revolution. It isn't just a voice, and it isn't a chatbot. It is a fully rendered 3D avatar.
Yes, this is what blew my mind too. They are building a medical-grade 3D avatar using libraries called 3.js and React 3 Fiber.
If you are listening, imagine holding up your phone, and on the screen is a realistic 3D character standing in a virtual room.
And this character has facial expressions, it has full skeletal animation, it is designed to act as the virtual practitioner. It literally demonstrates the movements.
Oh, wow.
The avatar will say, okay, let's test your shoulder mobility, watch me, and then lift your arm exactly like this. The avatar performs the movement perfectly, and then the computer vision watches the patient try to replicate it, analyzing the discrepancies in real time.
The cost and the timeline to build something this complex are laid out in plain text in the sources, and it is a massive undertaking. We were talking about 4,800 to 5,600 development hours.
That's a lot of hours.
The total financial cost is projected to be between $216,000 and $252,000. It requires a dedicated team of 9 to 11 senior developers working full-time for 5 to 6 months. That is $250,000 just to build the first version.
And a huge portion of that budget isn't just for the cool 3D graphics. It is for the stringent medical compliance required. You have to remember, Dr. DeLong isn't building a toy. He is building a medical device. And the regulatory bodies do not mess around.
The documents go deep into this compliance. The system has to output all of its findings in the standard medical SOAP format. What does SOAP stand for?
It stands for Subjective, Objective, Assessment, and Plan. It's the universal framework healthcare providers use to document a patient's visit.
Okay, break that down for me.
Subjective is what the patient tells the AI like, my knee hurts. Objective is what the computer vision measures. Range of motion is limited to 45 degrees. Assessment is the AI's preliminary diagnosis, and plan is the recommendation, like referring them to a specialist.
And the data has to be formatted using standardized medical terminology. The sources list HL7FHIR and SNOMED-C2. I see these acronyms a lot in health tech, but what do they actually mean in practice?
Think of them as the universal grammar and vocabulary of global healthcare. HL7FHIR, which stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, is the grammar. It dictates exactly how a piece of medical data should be structured so that a hospital in Paris and a clinic in New York can both read it.
Okay, grammar and SNOMED-CT.
That's the vocabulary. It is an incredibly comprehensive dictionary of medical terms. So instead of the AI just writing bad knee, which is vague, it uses a specific SNOMED code that universally translates to osteoarthritis of the right medial compartment.
By using these standards, Connexa ensures that when the AI generates a report, a human doctor can instantly read it and integrate it into the patient's electronic health record.
Exactly.
Furthermore, the entire system has to be completely HIPAA compliant in the US and GDPR compliant in Europe, meaning all data is encrypted at rest and in transit using AES 256 encryption.
This brings us to a really interesting section in the sources, the FLEX analysis of this AI assistant. When Connexa analyzed the strengths of their proposed system, the primary advantage wasn't the AI's diagnostic superiority. It was the accessibility for non-technical users.
Right. They are specifically targeting people over 50. The genius here is that they are overcoming the technological barrier of remote diagnostics by using a friendly 3D interface rather than a sterile web form. They are trying to make the complex technology completely invisible to the end user.
It's a huge interaction paradigm shift. But as a host, I know you must have some skepticism about this.
I absolutely do. It's a huge practical concern. Let's be real for a second. Is a 65-year-old woman with chronic sciatic nerve pain really going to feel comfortable being diagnosed by a 3D video game character on her phone? We all know about the uncanny valley effect.
Ah, yes. The uncanny valley. It's that psychological phenomenon where a digital face looks almost human, but there's something slightly off about the eyes or the movement, and it makes our brains subconsciously reject it as creepy or unsettling.
Exactly. If the avatar looks like a zombie from a video game, the patient is going to close the app immediately. Earning trust in healthcare is hard enough for a human doctor, you know. How does an avatar do it?
That is the pivotal design challenge, and the documents show Connexa has anticipated it. The user experience design choices are highly specific to the 50-plus demographic. They aren't trying to make the avatar hyper-realistic to the point of being unsettling.
What are they aiming for instead?
They are aiming for approachable and empathetic. Furthermore, they are using clear typography, high-contrast colors, and intuitive navigation built on a framework called SHAD-C-No-U.
But the most important element is the voice interaction, right?
Yeah.
The user doesn't have to fiddle with menus or type on a tiny keyboard with arthritic thumbs. They just talk to the avatar as if it were a person in the room.
Yep.
The goal is to bridge that trust gap by making the entire interaction feel conversational rather than transactional.
It is a brilliant strategy. But we have to pause here, because building a system that looks friendly, sounds empathetic, and moves smoothly is an incredible technical feat. However, it introduces massive, potentially life-threatening risks.
Yes. Just because an AI sounds incredibly smart or speaks with a soothing, confident voice does not mean it is smart. Which brings us to the ethical minefield of medical AI. This is where things get genuinely frightening.
We have a deeply sobering academic paper in our sources titled AI Competence Asymmetries. It meticulously details the fundamental dangers of relying on generative AI in high-stakes, critical decision-making environments like healthcare.
The paper defines these dangers by looking at the dimensions of asymmetry between humans and AI. And the first one they highlight is epistemological asymmetry. Let's break that down. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, how we know what we know. So what is epistemological asymmetry in the context of an AI doctor?
It is the dangerous widening disconnect between the appearance of competence and the substance of competence. A modern large language model can generate a response that looks undeniably rigorous.
Like it knows exactly what it's talking about.
Exactly. It uses perfect technical medical jargon. It structures the argument logically. It presents its findings with absolute, unwavering confidence. It might even cite academic sources.
But underneath that beautiful, superficial fluency, the actual reasoning mechanism might be completely fallacious, hallucinated, or dangerously wrong.
Precisely. Doesn't actually know anything.
Yeah.
It is just predicting the next most statistically likely word based on its training data.
I love analogies, so let me try one here. It feels like an AI is like a high school student who didn't read the assigned book, but they are an absolute master at using big vocabulary words and confident body language during the class presentation.
I love it.
They sound so good that if the teacher isn't paying incredibly close attention to the actual facts, the student gets an A. But in healthcare, if the AI bluffs its way through a diagnosis, the consequence isn't a bad grade, it's a misdiagnosis.
That is a very accurate analogy, and it leads directly into the second dimension the paper identifies, temporal asymmetry.
Temporal meaning time.
Right. AI produces these fluent, confident-sounding outputs in seconds, but it takes a human expert hours or even days to rigorously verify if that output is actually medically sound.
And in a busy clinical environment where a doctor might be seeing 30 patients a day, they don't have hours to verify the AI's logic.
No, they don't.
The pressure for rapid responses forces humans to rely on the AI's output, inevitably privileging velocity over validity. They just start trusting the machine because it's fast.
And the paper takes it a step further, warning about the rise of cynical exploiters.
What is a cynical exploiter in this context?
These are bad actors, perhaps fraudulent telemedicine companies or unqualified practitioners who understand exactly how AI works. They strategically use the AI's fluency to create a massive illusion of mastery.
Hey, that's terrifying.
They know the AI's recommendations aren't perfectly reliable, but they use it anyway to churn out thousands of automated diagnoses, betting on the patient's and the regulator's inability to detect the underlying flaws. They exploit the epistemological asymmetry for profit.
That is a terrifying thought. And the consequences of these algorithmic failures in healthcare are not just theoretical, they are historical, and they are heavily documented in our sources.
Absolutely. And to be very clear, as we discuss these examples of algorithmic bias from the source paper, we are strictly looking at the data presented by the researchers. We are neutrally reporting the findings detailed in these medical documents to illustrate how algorithms can fail, without taking any political stance.
Exactly. And just to be clear for you listening, we're just neutrally reporting the findings the researchers published here, not taking any sort of political stance. We are just unpacking the numbers the researchers provided. The text gives us two stark, real-world examples of how algorithms have systematically failed specific populations.
Right. The first is the Framingham Heart Study cardiovascular risk scores.
The Framingham Risk Score was an algorithm used for decades as the gold standard reference for predicting a patient's risk of developing heart disease. But the source documents point out a critical flaw. The original data used to build the algorithm came from a very specific, homogeneous demographic.
Yeah.
The researchers state that while this algorithm performed very well for Caucasian patients, it performed significantly worse for African American patients.
Because the algorithm wasn't trained on their specific physiological data or risk factors, according to the text, relying on this biased algorithm led to inequitable and inaccurate care distribution for years.
The second example the researchers provide is even more complex. It involves care allocation algorithms. A landmark study looked at the algorithms used by major health systems to determine which patients needed extra resources and specialized care programs.
And the study revealed that these racially biased algorithms systematically underestimated the medical needs of Black patients.
How did that happen? Was the AI explicitly programmed to be biased?
No, and that's the insidious nature of algorithmic bias. It wasn't explicit. The algorithm used healthcare costs as a proxy for medical needs.
Okay, explain that.
It assumed that people who spent more money on healthcare must be sicker and therefore need more help. But historically, due to systemic access issues, Black patients spent less on healthcare than white patients with the exact same level of illness.
So the AI learned a flawed proxy. It looked at a sick Black patient, saw low historical spending, and concluded they were healthy.
Yes. The researchers found that when they removed cost as a variable and recalibrated the algorithm with direct, objective health measures, like actual blood pressure or kidney function, the number of Black patients identified as needing additional care jumped massively,
Jumped how much?
from 17.7% to 46.5%.
Wow. These examples perfectly illustrate a concept the paper calls feedback loop amplification. Imagine if the flawed outputs of an AI doctor are used to make clinical decisions today, and those decisions are recorded in the medical records. Tomorrow, those very same medical records are fed back into the AI as training data.
The bias becomes baked in permanently. The algorithm degrades for certain populations, offering worse and worse advice, while looking increasingly accurate and confident because it's validating its own flawed past decisions. It is a vicious closed loop.
So we have to bring this back to Dr. Christophe Delong and Connexa. We know the stakes. How does a platform like Connexa's, with its 3D avatar diagnosing movement, mitigate these massive systemic risks? If the AI gets it wrong, someone could be told their hip is fine when they actually have a fracture.
Looking at the technical documents, Connexus is employing a few very specific strategies. The biggest one is called ARG retrieval augmented generation combined with knowledge graphs.
This is a crucial technical safeguard. Standard generative AI operates entirely from memory, right? It tries to guess the answer based on billions of parameters, which is why it hallucinates fake medical facts.
Exactly.
Okay, let me try another analogy here to explain ARGI for the listeners. Standard AI is taking the ultimate medical board exam entirely from memory. It might be brilliant, but if it forgets a detail, it will just make up a convincing-sounding lie to fill the gap. ARGI retrieval augmented generation forces the AI to take an open book test.
That is exactly how it works. Before the AI is allowed to speak to the patient, it is forced to retrieve information from a highly curated, structurally verified database of medical protocols. The knowledge graph.
Okay, so it checks its facts.
Yes. It anchors the AI's responses strictly within verifiable medical data. It cannot make up a diagnosis. It can only point to a diagnosis that exists in the approved textbook.
The source notes that this RAG approach improves accuracy to between 85% and 91%. But I have to push back hard on this. I'm looking at that number, 91% accuracy. If I'm playing a video game, 91% is an A-. That's fantastic.
Sure.
But in healthcare, a 9% failure rate means almost 1 out of every 10 people gets the wrong diagnosis. If 10 people use the Connexa app and 1 person is told their torn ACL is just a minor sprain, that is unacceptable. How does Connexa justify launching a medical product with a 9% error rate?
That is the exact right question to ask, and it is why Connex's core design philosophy is the ultimate mitigation. The system is fundamentally designed around the principle that AI must augment, not replace, human judgment. Connex's 3D avatar is explicitly not designed to provide a final definitive diagnosis.
What does it do then?
It generates preliminary diagnostic hypotheses and issues referrals. Think of it as the ultimate triage nurse. The avatar gathers the subjective data, it uses computer vision to structure the objective movement data, it applies the RAG open book test to formulate a hypothesis, and then, crucially, it hands the entire SOAP report off to a human specialist.
Okay.
It keeps the doctor in the loop. The human doctor reviews the AI's highly organized findings and makes the final call.
Okay, that makes sense. It's an exoskeleton for the doctor's mind, doing the tedious data gathering and preliminary analysis so the human expert can focus purely on the final decision.
Exactly. So we've seen the incredible underlying biology, we've dissected the AWS tech stack, and we've navigated the ethical tightrope. But this brings us to the final massive question. Why invest $250,000 to build this specific tool? Where's the demand that justifies the risk and the cost?
To understand the sheer scale of the opportunity Connexa is targeting, we have to zoom out globally. We have to look at the massive healthcare transformations happening right now across Asia. The final set of documents we have is a comprehensive market report on Asian healthcare systems, and it paints a picture of a region facing unprecedented demographic and infrastructural challenges.
Let's start with the demographic time bomb. The aging populations in Asia are shifting the entire medical landscape.
Look at South Korea, for example. The data shows their population is aging so rapidly that by 2035, which is barely a decade away, 30% of the entire population will be over the age of 65.
That's huge.
Think about the strain that puts on a healthcare system when nearly 1 in 3 people is of retirement age.
And in China, the transition is just as stark, but on an exponentially larger scale. They are facing a massive wave of aging citizens coupled with an explosion of chronic, non-communicable diseases, what they call NCDs.
NCDs are things you don't catch from someone else, right? They are conditions like stroke, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and musculoskeletal issues like osteoarthritis.
Exactly. And unlike a flu, which requires a week of care, NCDs require continuous, long-term, decades-long management. The need for constant monitoring of mobility issues is going to completely overwhelm traditional brick-and-mortar hospital infrastructure. There physically are not enough hospital beds to manage the coming wave of chronic patients.
And when we look at the medical infrastructure in some of these emerging markets, there is already a massive gap. Let's look at the data on Myanmar. The report shows they only have 0.93 doctors for every 1,000 inhabitants, less than 1 doctor per 1,000 people.
Wow.
By comparison, most Western European countries have between 3 and 4 doctors per 1,000.
And the economic reality for those doctors in Myanmar is incredibly difficult. Doctors in the public sector make roughly 170 to 550 euros a month. It is a completely unsustainable wage. As a result, the report states that 70% of public sector doctors are forced to work dual jobs, running private clinics in the evenings just to survive.
And the financial burden falls heavily on the patients. In Cambodia, the data shows that patients face out-of-pocket healthcare costs of around 60%. Imagine paying 60% of every medical bill entirely out of your own savings.
It's staggering.
If a family member gets sick or needs knee surgery, it can be financially ruinous. In rural areas, traditional medical infrastructure is either completely absent or prohibitively expensive to travel to.
But here is where the narrative shifts dramatically, and where Dr. Delong's vision comes into sharp focus. Despite these severe human crises, despite the lack of physical clinics and the shortage of human doctors, there was a massive parallel digital revolution happening.
I found this statistic staggering. In Myanmar, despite all the political and economic turmoil, there is a 90% mobile SIM penetration rate. Think about that. You have rural areas with unpaved roads and inconsistent electricity, but almost everyone is holding a smartphone connected to the internet.
And this mobile ubiquity is driving an absolute boom in telemedicine applications. The sources mention platforms like MyAndCare and MyDoctor, which are seeing hundreds of thousands of downloads. People who have never set foot in a modern hospital are accessing medical advice through apps.
It's a phenomenon known as leapfrogging. If you're listening, you might have heard this term applied to telecommunications. Many developing countries never bothered to build millions of miles of copper wire for landline telephones. They just skipped the landline era entirely and leapfrogged straight to cell towers and mobile phones.
The exact same phenomenon is happening in healthcare. If a country doesn't have the capital, the resources, or the decades of time required to build thousands of physical clinics and train tens of thousands of specialized doctors, what do?
They skip it.
They jump straight to the next technological paradigm. They leapfrog the brick-and-mortar hospital and go straight to virtual clinics.
This is the ultimate paradox, and it is where all of this clicks together. The places with the least physical medical infrastructure like rural Cambodia, the steppes of Mongolia, or remote villages in Myanmar might actually adopt Kinexa's futuristic 3D AI avatar technology significantly faster than a high-tech hospital in Paris or New York. Not because it's a cool novelty, but out of absolute pure necessity.
Exactly. When you have no alternative, innovation moves at lightning speed. But, and this is a critical but, to launch medtech in these Asian markets, a company like Kinexa still has to navigate incredibly strict regulatory landscapes. The governments are desperate for solutions, but they aren't dropping their safety standards.
The sources outline a few of these agencies. If Kinexa wants to deploy their AI in China, they have to go through the NMPA, the National Medical Products Administration. The NMPA often requires foreign tech to undergo extensive, localized clinical trials within China before approval.
In India, they have to deal with the CDSCO, the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization. In Singapore, it's the HSA, the Health Sciences Authority. All of these bodies have rigorous, complex classifications for software as a medical device. You can't just release an app onto the App Store and call it a diagnostic tool. You have to scientifically prove its clinical efficacy and data security.
Which brings us full circle back to the very beginning. Why is Dr. Christophe Delong spending $250,000 to ensure Kinexa's AI uses HL7 FHIR standards, outputs in SOAP format, and is backed by heavily verified knowledge graphs?
Because he understands the global macroeconomic trends. Look at the board. An aging global population, the explosion of chronic mobility diseases, a severe lack of physical doctors, the absolute ubiquity of smartphones, and the uncompromising need for strict medical compliance to cross borders. When you synthesize all of that, Kinexa's 3D AI assistant suddenly stops looking like a risky startup experiment and starts looking like an incredibly calculated solution.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Kinexa Formation isn't just building an app to check if your knee is healing. They are attempting to build a highly exportable, infinitely scalable digital clinic. They are taking elite Parisian biomechanical expertise, packaging it into a lightweight, multilingual 3D interface, and preparing to deploy it onto smartphones in Jakarta, Ulaanbaatar, or Yangon. They are offering medical-grade preliminary diagnostics at a fraction of the cost of a physical doctor's visit to people who otherwise might never see a specialist.
It is a stunning, paradigm-shifting vision. It takes the invisible neuromotor loop, digitizes it through AI, and exports it to the world.
Let's quickly recap the incredible journey we've been on today. We started deep inside the microscopic architecture of the human brain, analyzing the millisecond by millisecond firing of neurons in the prefrontal cortex, and the staggering 6,800 newtons of force required just to perform a simple ballet pirouette. We looked at the tactile, highly intuitive art of how human doctors physically assess that movement in a clinic through the anamnesis, palpation, and resistance tests.
We then explored how Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa Formation are leveraging advanced AWS cloud infrastructure, EKS clusters, and computer vision to translate that physical doctor's touch into the watchful eye of a 3D AI avatar. We navigated the dangerous ethical risks of algorithmic bias, understanding how AI's superficial fluency can mask fatal errors, and why human oversight, anchored by RA technology, remains absolutely critical.
And finally, we saw how this specific technology might find its true proving ground and its most desperate patients in the booming, rapidly aging, and digitally leapfrogging markets of Asia.
It is the ultimate synthesis of human biology, complex code, and global economics.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with something deep to ponder on your own. Something we haven't explicitly discussed yet, but that sits right at the heart of this technological shift. As we get better and better at mapping every single millimeter of human movement into data points, and as our smartphones and 3D avatars become our very first point of medical contact, will we eventually stop trusting our own subjective feeling of our bodies?
It's a profound philosophical question. If a machine can use computer vision to see a micro asymmetry in your gait that you can't even feel, or predict a muscle weakness weeks before you experience any pain, who becomes the ultimate authority on your own health? You or the algorithm?
Will we reach a point in the near future where we only truly believe we are injured, or conversely, only truly believe we are healed, when the digital avatar tells us the data proves it? We started today's deep dive by talking about the comforting, binary simplicity of a broken bone on an X-ray. It's clean, it's visible. But as we wade deeper and deeper into these diagnostic muddy waters, guided by incredibly complex artificial intelligence, the picture isn't black and white anymore. It's a trillion invisible data points of movement, constantly rendering, constantly updating, in real time. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the intersection of humanity and technology, and we'll see you next time.